Welcome to the Digital Velocity Podcast, a podcast covering the intersection between strategy, digital marketing, and emerging trends impacting each of us. In each episode, we interview industry veterans to dive into the best, hard-hitting analysis of industry news and critical topics facing brand executives. Now, here are your hosts, Tim Curtis and Erik Martinez.
Welcome to today's episode of the Digital Velocity Podcast. I'm Erik Martinez from Blue Tangerine.
And I'm Tim Curtis from Cohere One.
Today, we have Paul Rakovich, who is the CEO of Clicks and Clients, to talk to us today about paid media in 2022 and beyond. Paul, thanks for joining us today on Digital Velocity.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me today. Pleasure to be with you.
So I'm curious, before the show, we were chatting and kind of laughing about some of the things that we've all experienced in our careers. And, Paul, you go back, we were kind of joking, BG before Google. And one of the things I'd love to hear just from your perspective is maybe a little of the lessons you've learned growing your company. That's a pretty broad time span, but you've certainly seen a lot in that time.
It was fun to reminisce about the old stuff, the old bid jamming and overture. And so someone would bid $1, then you'd jam them at 99 cents, then they'd jam you at 98, then you log in an hour later and you'd bid $1.20. And that was the game with misspellings and just basically pay to play. If I would bid more on the term, I would get it. Didn't matter how good or bad your ad was. And then that changed. And then Google came in, then social came in. The ones that always stand out to me are cracking the code of these difficult problems. Those are some of the funnest ones. I feel like right now we're in the mix of it. With an account, again, there's some cool stories like getting this account to go from like $50,000 a month to $300,000 a month to $1 million a month. But like along the way, thought the client was going to fire us. Client came with these really great ideas. We came with great ideas. They totally stunk. They completely bombed. And it's like iterating on that and trying to crack the code and gain insight to move accounts forward. So I think some of the bigger lessons are like nothing lasts forever. Overture was great till it wasn't great. And Google's still pretty great, but it's changed. Facebook, we were talking about, was gravy train awesome until it wasn't. So it's like the fundamentals of marketing are still there. I think the other one is the most successful clients and the coolest things we've seen, like they just play the game differently. They're focused a lot more on lifetime value. They're focused more on like tweaking and refining things along the way versus if I change this headline from black to red, triple sales, those kinds of like silly things that aren't the reality of getting in and doing the work. It's hard work and most stuff doesn't work and it's frustrating and difficult. And every once in a while you borrow something from old times that comes in and saves the day. But I feel like we're still faced with those, this should work, it didn't work, now what the heck do we do kind of moments. We're right in the thick of one. It feels exactly the same way. Those are some of my memories. Copywriting's still great, super important.
When you talk about digital, there's a lot of times the conversation tends to drift to the tactical because there's so much here, there, and everywhere. You're focusing on bid score, bid quality. There's all those kind of things that obviously mesh in. But I think taking a step back and looking at that overall strategy for your digital, in particular, your pay-per-click, both within the social and the Google type ecosystems. One of the things we were mentioning before the show was talking about Apple's intelligent tracking prevention and the shutdown of third-party cookies. Of course, that's already gone through in Apple and iOS, and we're seeing just massive impacts from that. Obviously, Google's set to do that next year with the Android side. How are you seeing the impact of this for your clients? And then how are you sort of then pivoting based off this pool of knowledge you have from over the years? How are you then pivoting to recommend to them to not necessarily get around the issue, but get their hands on it and continue to be successful?
Learn to live with it and learn to adapt. There's tactical pieces. Like on Facebook, have the API connected, right? So you have the API connected, now you're getting a little bit more data through and like just making that change be more successful. There's execution pieces with things, certainly that can be helpful. Demographic targeting, geographic targeting, but it still comes back to like the stuff we're working on right now. So there's the tactical side of it on those big spenders, or not even big spenders, but hey, we have to have the Facebook API connected. If you want this to perform well, like you just got to do it and suck it up and figure it out. So there's stuff like that, but we're still going back to creative. We're still going back to copy. We're just really having to sharpen the sword on things. We have a client where desktop leads are quite a bit more valuable than mobile leads. Most people have kind of forgot about desktop, and in Facebook, it's not a whole lot. But in Google, like there's still a decent amount of desktop flow. So we're going back to accounts and saying, step 1 is a lead, step 2 is a booked appointment, step 3 is a shown appointment. Can we break this down by device? Maybe we've been a little scared to have a more expensive lead, quote unquote, but maybe these desktop leads are like a lot better. So that's where we're kind of borrowing from other clients to really sharpen the sword on things. So I think there's both tactical pieces, but then there's also just back to copy, back to creative. How can we say this better? How can we be more precise? I think we're just really having to sharpen the sword. So it's get Facebook back to where you can get it, as close to where you can get it. And then you just got to sharpen the sword on every angle at this point.
You've had some clients that have really seen this huge drop in Facebook performance that we were talking about.
Yeah, it was so easy. You just put a pixel there and said, give me people that buy this and set the audience broad. Don't even target. Just give me people that buy this. And Facebook's like, here you go, silver platter. And now it's like, whoops. So that broad doesn't quite work, but also going like ultra segmented doesn't quite work. Originally, there were these tools that would separate out, well, how does the audience that likes this versus this perform? And then you'd run them and then try and slice and dice the data if you could. It's like that doesn't work anymore. So it's almost this happy medium from a targeting standpoint to try and, I think, probably layer in as many different data points and to try and get a little closer. So you can't be super broad, you can't be hyper focused. You got to really find the happy medium. And even then, that doesn't always work.
And that's the frustration.
Yeah, you might have the happy medium, but do you do a bid cap? Do you do a cost cap campaign or a lowest cost campaign? Do you put in all the states or do you put in your top performing states? Does a lowest cost campaign work up to $1,000 a day? But when you raise the budget to $5,000 a day, it completely falls apart. There's still, feels like there's a lot of massaging. And it feels like even that massaging is almost on an account by account basis.
And so that implies that there's a lot of testing.
A lot of testing.
I was just having this conversation with the folks at iHeartMedia yesterday, talking to them about a particular client. And I kind of feel like some of the digital tools that we have today are just exactly what you said. You can hyper target, but then you hyper target yourself so narrow that there's no audience to reach. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you're getting to that audience, but you're already getting to them anyways somewhere else. Right. So you have to have this layering mentality of multiple types of media, both digital and traditional, to help move that needle. I think the question is, for them to know that anything is working, you have to have a game plan. And so the question is, what is that game plan and how long do you need to measure it to say this is successful or not before we move on to the next thing? My paid search team at one point in time, I remember them telling me I can micro test something for 2 or 3 days and then get results and move. And that's not true anymore. We can't seem to make that work. So what is the right set of intentionality that you're going after, and how long before you know it's successful or not?
Yeah, I totally agree. It almost seems like with Google too, you could just change. It's not TCP anymore. You could like change a bid and tomorrow it would be different. And now it almost takes a week to do it. So what I look for, the clients have to have an appetite for spending. I think to one of your points, Tim, it's feeling more and more like you have to have a lot of dough to throw at this to get stuff to work. You're not going to do it on a $50 a day campaign. So on these big accounts with $1,000, $2,000 a day as like a test campaign, we're still trying to get out of learning to feel like we found something out or like have an answer. But in the meantime, we're looking at things. I'm trying to make a judgment call of, is this a game we can win? So we had this idea the other day around setting up a campaign a certain way, targeting method by geographies, and everyone's like, this is cool, let's do it. And we do it, and everyone's like, $1,500 a day. We're targeting a lot of different areas. It's going to take some time. And we're on day 3, and the CPM's like over $100. So the cost per link click is like $10. So we're looking at it right now, 3 days in, going like, is this a game we can win? And then we're trying to pull from other accounts of like, when we did this, did it start off at 100, go down to 50, end up at 40? Not that CPM is like the end all be all. The thing I tell the team is like, are we playing a game we can win? So if we're at $100 CPM, our cost per lead's coming in 4x what it's supposed to be. Is this a game we can win? in the next 2 weeks. And if it is, or we think it is, let's place the bet, but let's be pretty confident about it. So I'm feeling like it takes a couple weeks with a decent amount of budget. Got to get out of learning on Facebook, got to be patient. But I do look at some leading indicators and get a little antsy on this project in particular. Like everyone's cool with the testing plan and they're cool with losing some money until they're not, right? Even if they're like, yeah, it's $100 a day, no problem, no problem. And then we're going to hang for 2 weeks. Everyone in agreement? Yeah, no problem. And then we're 4 days in, the cost per lead's $100. Everyone's like biting their nails. So I try and stay a bit ahead of where I think the client's going to go with that. But yeah, it takes time. Got to be able to break some eggs. And I just feel like it's taking more and more budget to test stuff out. Like at $50-$100 a day, there better be a decent amount of conversions behind it to get some data, or else it's going to struggle, in my opinion.
The runway to success is shorter. You have less time now to prove that success because the aptitude there for spending like that, it's pretty diminished. People are being very judicious about their dollars because you've got these businesses that have built, themselves on Facebook. They use Facebook as their primary advertising vehicle or their primary lead generation vehicle. And all of a sudden somebody moved their cheese in a big way with these privacy changes. And, it's just not as successful. So that's a rude awakening, if you will. And now, to your point, people aren't just hanging out and letting that credit card run for a week without looking at it. That's just not happening.
Yeah, but they have to. They don't want to, but they kind of have to. There has to be an appetite to crack some eggs. There just has to. Even if it's a loss, there better be a pretty decent learning lesson out of it. And that might save it as well. Like, wow, this completely fell on its face, but there was a couple of glimmers of hope. So next iteration of it is, instead of targeting these 60 geographic areas, we're going to try the top 5 that actually performed. That might be the saving grace of this campaign. That's looking a little rough, but it's only 2 days in. It's not out of learning, and everyone agreed this is going to take 2 weeks. So
you said that before companies focus on Facebook ads or any kind of paid ad, that some things need to be fixed first. What are those things in your mind that need to be fixed before they start pouring money down the Facebook or Google path?
I'm in this online ski group, and it's like the coolest thing I've ever done. And it's like the most amazing service ever. They were talking this morning, and the guy who runs it was like, hey, can I get the feedback from the group? What do you think is better for a headline for the website? Learn to ski online. It was all about them, all about the product, not benefit driven at all, right? I think going back through, there's some suggestions about the story brand piece. What's the benefit? What do we want people to do? If you have these 5 different ideas, what's the measurement that you're going to go off of that this is successful? Is it time on page? Is it clicks deeper into the site? Is it people signing up for the course? How would you measure quote unquote success? So I think being clear on what the goals are, at least some measurables, even if it's not like you got to have something right off the bat, even if it's like an email opt-in, just something to measure off of. And then you could start to throw some traffic at it, knowing I'm measuring something. I think that's really the first step. So getting kind of the house in order around benefit driven, clear call to action. Where am I? What can I do here? Why should I do it? And then a basic measurement before people start to turn traffic live. I think that's really important. The other piece is just high intent keywords. Like, is there volume there for people looking for this? If we're going into Google specifically. And if there is, and there's other people advertising on it, then I'm usually like, all right, cool, this is going to work. I know I can at least play, if not beat the folks that are in here, at least play. So that's the other piece I think is really important to look at. Is there high intent keywords for Google specifically? The example that I was giving someone yesterday, my brother and sister-in-law have a charter business in the Virgin Islands, and there's keywords exactly for that. Excursion, XYZ Islands, day trips, private charters. And so it's like, I know we can go in and nail that. Can we go in and get people that are searching for like things to do on ABC Island and then decide like, oh yeah, maybe I want to go on a boat. Yeah, okay, I'm going to sign up. Probably not. Is there search volume around that specific thing? If not, you're going to have to generate demand or interest or get someone to turn the corner. I think that's a much more difficult game to play.
That makes sense. So are you guys or any of your clients using AI to manage their budgets or spends? Are you using those kinds of tools, and are you seeing them be effective? I mean, and I've always been on this position. Our agency works with mid-size accounts. So not necessarily the budgets that you guys are working with on a daily basis. And one thing that's always seemed true when AI is involved, you still need a lot of data.
Yeah. I think back to one of my early clients. He was a Social Security disability attorney in San Diego, and we're running ads for him. And one day at the end of this phone call, it was like, hey, who's the best client? And he's like, people that have been turned down for SSDI. And I was like, okay, well, why is that? He's like, I have a 94% success ratio in overturning those verdicts. And I was like, do you think I could say that in an ad? And he's like, absolutely. So the ad copy was denied SSDI question mark, 94% overturn rate. That ad like just killed it. And I don't feel like AI is at the point where it's figuring that stuff out. Like it's not thinking that deep. We've done a couple of programs, not around bid management necessarily, but around copy and creative. So we used a copy one that takes Facebook ads, changes the headline, and it's a really cool presentation. It makes intuitive sense. We have mapped these keywords to specific emotions, and based on the account performance, your audience responds to the emotions of fear and blah, blah, blah. And then it like outputs these headlines, and it kind of sort of works, like kind of sort of a little bit. And then we used another one that was supposed to give a predictive score on Facebook creative. And the pitch was, you're going to have to throw this in the market, put budget behind it, find out if it's a winner or a loser. And instead, you can upload to the API, and the API will give a score like a red light, green light, yellow light. And it'll tell you if it's going to be a winner. Therefore, you're like only putting winners in, or like high confidence winners in. And that thing never, ever picked a winner, ever. Like ever. And all kinds of cool ways to slice and dice the data, right? Like this ad has 2 people versus 1 person. The perfect recipe is 1 person plus this headline plus this color palette plus this. It never works. I think part of it is there's just too much behind the scenes. Even in a Google search, even if an algorithm can look at something like you got demo, age, time of day, device, internet speed, there's just all these other variables. And so that I don't even think the AI can see all that to make a prediction.
There's too many permutations.
I think so, yeah.
And not enough consistency in what people are doing. Isn't that the promise of AI? I mean, really, that's way, way back early in my career. My first job out of college was working on an AI project. This is exactly the type of stuff that they wanted to do. This was, I hate to say it, mid-90s. And the technology was completely new. Let's be honest, our marketing systems, including our digital tracking systems, are less than perfect and often spit out a lot of noise and garbage. So you're expecting a machine to take in the context and create all these little tiny nuances, and they can handle more permutations than us. It kind of comes back to that micro audience, too broad of an audience thing. You got to be somewhere in the middle type thing, right?
Yeah. Is it actionable, right? If it's like Instagram is a really great placement for you with this creative, so you pull that creative out, you run it just Instagram only placement, and it performs like crap because you're not running all placements. I see you and I agree. However, like to make that actionable, there's often a disconnect there in my experience.
You think about AI, and AI has been the benefit of some great marketing. AI is positioned out there. People don't want to question AI. We've got all sorts of examples, both of course with clients, but also there's plenty of stories about how AI has deep flaws. AI is only as good as, number one, the information we put into it, and as readable as the context is. Those are things that a great CMO or a great VP of e-commerce or whatever your title needs to approach, and needs to have the confidence to approach AI with some skepticism. Is turning over all of my bids to Google AI and allowing them to run with it, is that really in my best interest?
The bidding piece in Google is getting better because Google has all the info. If it's like a third-party platform trying to layer on top of it, I think it's tough. But even then, you still got to test. The best place I found is like for cool copy ideas. So there's a couple of AI copywriting tools out there. It's like, that's kind of a cool angle. That's kind of a cool headline that we're going to mix in with this thing. But we still got to tell the thing. We still know the most important client is someone who's been turned down for disability insurance. Therefore, how can we attract that person? I want to speak to them. but it might have like a cool call to action or something like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting.
On this topic of AI, this is actually a true story this week. Google has been working harder and harder at automating their internal processes. So all the review, the ads, and all this stuff is running through this crazy automation system. Almost 2 weeks ago now, we had a client whose shopping feed, we work with a lot of e-commerce clients, and their shopping feed went down. It went in the review. The response from our Google rep has been, hey, it's in review. It could take up to 7 days. I'm like, hey, this is having a serious impact on revenue. The shopping program is a big piece of the
Sure.
marketing budget. Day 8, still no answer. Day 9, still no answer. So we try to escalate. They actually suggested put in another ticket because the way our systems work, and we have no visibility to it. So we put in another ticket. We got another response yesterday, and the response was, yeah, it's still in review. Our review teams are way behind, and so it may extend the process a couple more days. Okay, this is Google, who has automated all their systems to the point that nobody can actually peek in underneath it unless you have a PhD in engineering. That can't help this one client out who, quite frankly, now we're looking at going, this may go on forever. We're going to find a way to reclaim some of those sales. And guess what? I'm not putting them back into the Google bucket. So AI is kind of a double-edged sword in my opinion. And so that is the main reason for that question. So changing tracks a little bit,
Sure.
Paul, as we start looking at different spend levels, your company, you got clients that are spending $10,000 a month, $100,000 a month, $1 million a month in Facebook ads. What are the things to consider as you're moving between levels?
It's a really good question. Generally speaking, the smaller budget ones are tracking an action. It's like a cost per conversion. Generally, in my experience, like they're tracking a conversion. It's a lead. We think the leads are good. Maybe there's a measure on it past that, but usually not. It's like a lead, or it's a smaller campaign where it's like, I spend $10,000 on Google. I make $30,000 in sales. My cost of product is this. Therefore, like I'm comfortable spending that. So that's the smaller budgets. The next level up, I think those clients are looking at cost per acquisition for the most part. So we're allowed to get a little bit away from the hyper focus on cost per lead. Cheaper leads are better. With this one, it's leads, booked meetings, showed meetings, sales. The booked meetings is a little more leading indicator. The percentage of leads to booked meetings is an indicator of quality. So we're looking at that. But like the sales cycle is still a little longer. And so at some point we're looking at a cost per sale, but we can't tie the data all the way back to say, desktop cost per sale is $1,000, mobile it's $2,000. We should dedicate more towards mobile, for example. The big spenders, in my experience, are looking almost exclusively at lifetime value. There's been a couple of clients where we've kind of built a name in certain industries, like, oh, you guys handled this account. Like, wow, that's pretty cool. And we've talked to related people. And when we start to talk about like cost per lead and stuff, they're just like, what? How in the world can you guys spend that much for a lead? Holy cow, that doesn't make any sense. I would say on our side, we're looking at lifetime value, ultimate cost per sale, several steps further down the funnel. Those large spenders, those businesses are like impeccably well run. I mean, the sales process is world-class. The follow-up's world-class. The ability to test and try stuff. 2 of those AI things, the ad copy one was from this client, and we probably spent $500,000 in ad spend testing this thing out. The whole reason he kept doing it is that it beat their email control, the AI software did. So he's like, look, it's already paid for itself. If we can find another nugget in the next year, like totally cool. But their willingness, and their CMO specifically, his willingness to like test, try, find stuff out is so much greater at that larger spend level. And there's such a bigger tolerance for, shoot, that didn't work. In fact, we would get calls sometimes and he'd say like, why did you guys turn that off? We only spent $10,000 on that. That's not nearly enough. We're going to test this. So their tolerance to test was by far the highest. They're really well-run businesses too. So we look pretty good dumping $1 million a month of prospects in the top, but their systems process structure is freaking awesome. It's just unbeatable. So their follow-up's going to crank out more leads. The sales process is going to crank out more leads. And when we talk to these lesser sophisticated folks that were kind of in the same industry, and they're like, this doesn't make any sense that you're generating a lead for $50. This does not compute kind of thing. Like they just weren't as good as operating the business, in my opinion.
I think you bring up a good point. I mean, even for our e-commerce retailers, being well organized and having good operation from the time the order comes in the door to the time it goes through all the processes, credit card processing, all the way out the back end and into your home. Those companies that execute that well do better with their marketing spends than the companies that just kind of like constantly have stuff on back order or it never shows up and orders mysteriously get canceled.
Yeah.
So that makes a ton of sense.
The e-com folks that don't keep their shopping feed up, and you look at the shopping ROAS and it kind of sucks. And then you poke into it and it's like, oh, you only have one size available in this product. You're completely sold out of these 10. But just find the organization of the business has an impact. So like shopping feed's tight, descriptions are well written, everything's up to date. That's going to make you or I more successful. No question about it. It's a lot easier just to say, can you guys get the ROAS a little higher? Can you just pull a magic rabbit out of the hat? So yeah, those will do okay. We've done like some clothing boutiques and they're okay, but they just never like get to that next notch from what I've seen. They almost have to be reinvented, or the leadership has to change, or they need to level up the business in some form or fashion.
Kind of pivoting a little bit, we've sort of been through the first two rounds, at least. I think we're on 2.1 or 2.2 of Apple's intelligent tracking prevention. We've got Google. Google has not made the third-party cookie change completely yet. So that's coming, but understanding, and maybe this is a sort of a bit of a two-part, I guess you could consider. Number one, what would you say are the three most significant changes that Google has made in the last year that the listeners should really care about and pay attention to? And then we'll get to the future.
Yeah, I think this performance max focus, when you run those performance campaigns, they just like completely take over the budget completely. And those scare me. I'm sure it will get solved. There was a point where if you advertise on Bing's audience network, we're running a campaign and all these leads came in that were just complete garbage. But what was interesting is whomever was filling them out or whatever automated thing was filling them out was actually grabbing an IP address from the appropriate city. So it'd grab an IP address, click through the site, bot would fill out the form, but they always did it like a Yahoo email address. I was like, oh, you dummies, step your fraud game up. And so on these other campaigns where Google's like completely taking over, I see a lot of what feels reminiscent to that. Like the forms are getting filled out, but they're garbage, the geo's garbage, the client can't contact them. And so I feel like you really got to be careful in looking at a step or two deeper in the quality when you let Google take the reins. That's the one that I'm kind of most scared of. The coolest one, or where we're seeing accounts do a lot better, is max conversion setting. So let max conversions go, let Google figure it out, set what used to be a TCPA bid on it. Those are generally performing better, like pretty much across the board. The caveat to that is like now you really don't have a whole lot of levers to control. So you're running a display campaign, discovery campaign with max conversions. You can pretty much manage the daily bid and the creative, and that's like probably literally all you can do. There's no other levers to pull, right? Like let's redo the creative, let's raise the budget, lower the budget, and we can maybe like try and think, hey, if I raise the budget, they're going to be less efficient with it. If I lower the budget, they'll be more efficient. But that's kind of a guessing game, honestly. So that's my second one in terms of what I'm seeing at the moment. Third one, biggest change. I don't know if it's a problem or not, but like the close variant piece and like exact match not being exact match anymore. I'm kind of 50-50 on it. Part of me is in cases where we've even been able to slice and dice the data like a bajillion ways, is there a difference between a click for personal injury attorney and personal injury lawyer, like 3 steps down? Like I don't know that you can really get there. So if Google mixes them up, probably not the end of the world. But that one just annoys me because I always had my exact match campaigns, phrase match, broad. Exact would get $10, phrase would get $5, broad would get $250 in terms of a bid. I just feel like that's like been taken away from me. I want it back.
Our search team has felt the exact same thing. I would say on the flip side of that coin, I think Google has gotten better at contextualizing the searches for those and determining intent, the results are better. There's a handful of searches I can still find where Google is confused, and you can just tell by looking at the
Sure.
results, it's just all over the place, but it's not as prevalent. So
Yeah.
maybe the need for those things isn't as necessary anymore because they've gotten better on determining intent.
Times might be a changing on that one for sure. I just kind of miss it.
The truth is flexibility, and a lot of these things require flexibility on a personal level because we have run things the same way for quite a while, and you're used to that organization. And when that's taken away, your cheese has been moved. That's a little hard. That's Google, right? Much more touted, I guess you could say, or much more in the news would be Facebook, Instagram.
Sure.
And we've talked about this before with previous guests, but I believe it was late February, the Wall Street Journal released an article. It was really a good article that really conceptualized what the challenges were. And it was inside Facebook's $10 billion breakup with advertisers. And it was going into some of the detail about the loss of that transactional information, a lot of that privacy that has been turned off through the iOS channels and the Android side as well. There have been other changes, but let's go back and identify, just like with Google, three. What are the three biggest for you or your clients?
Ooh, that's a good one. Biggest change. We're revisiting a lot of stuff that didn't technically work in the past. So specifically around bid strategy, there are several accounts where like lowest cost just never worked. And now we're revisiting it. And what we're finding is that has to be a piece of the puzzle to have some scale. Running an account solely on a cost cap probably isn't going to work. And oddly, we're finding when you have both that the accounts are performing better. And the accounts we're running, we can't just throw everything into a cost cap. It just won't spend. We can't throw everything into a lowest cost. It kind of hits this point and it just doesn't work. Like it just goes sideways. Or it's awesome for like 2 weeks. And all of a sudden it's like, oh no, this is not working anymore. Same thing with Google. Like there's only so many levers you can pull on a campaign like that. It's creative copy. Copy I don't really pay as much attention to, but creative for sure. Okay, that can be a difference. But daily budget, that's about it. Like you either raise it, lower it, and hope Facebook's more efficient from it. So revisiting a lot of stuff. I'm still pressing clients and potential clients on creative. I still think outside of the API, there's still nothing better than you can do than work on creative, test creative, find a better creative. If you were to like tie my hands behind the back, or I could only do one thing, I would spend every penny on creative, still no matter what. Third thing. I think like we were talking about earlier, it's this like can't go too broad, can't go too small. On this campaign that's even a little shaky, we're targeting a pretty broad audience. It's a 5% lookalike campaign to get a decent size audience there. And I was talking to the CMO of this big spender who we just talk shop a lot. Our CPMs are $100, super high. And our cost per link clicks $10, which is not viable long-term. His take was 1% is going to have a better click-through rate. I bet you'll see a lower CPM, lower link click if you go smaller. So we're just testing, we're just trying to figure out like, is one right? And then that only spends $500 a day. Is 5 right? I know it's a specific, there's just a lot of freaking massaging. I think the expectation is really got to massage a heck of a lot more than you used to. And then all of a sudden, like it pops, right? So it's 1 to 3%. And if you go 21 to 65, the account does great. If you go 24 to 55, the campaign sucks and doesn't spend. The older and younger leads aren't the best, but you kind of got to have them for the overall to perform well. And so I feel like it's a lot of massaging.
A lot of massaging. So can we go back to creative for a second?
Sure.
When we were talking pre-show, you were saying, hey, I've got 2 people doing creative all the time. One of the things I'm seeing just kind of across the digital landscape right now is value being placed on originality because we have been a copy culture for the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years, right? Lots of posts and reposts of other people's content. And I'm starting to see in Google in particular on the organic side, but I'm also starting to see this a little bit on Facebook. It seems like originality of content is becoming more and more valuable because we're in a sea of copy right now.
Sure.
So as your team works on creative, what's the mix? Not that there's a
Yeah.
million things you can do on Facebook in terms of creative, at least on static ads. How much do you put into those static ads versus, like developing motion ads or video ads? Where do you guys sit on that?
Yeah, and the big spenders, at least 50% or more is going to video, being like UGC, video ad, or motion graphic. And then static still has a place, but it's definitely not. And even that's account specific. I looked at an account the other day and it's only dynamic ads, no other ads, and the account's killing it. And I looked at a golf account for a client we do his Google work, and he's running only a carousel ad. And I look at both of those and I'm like, carousels usually never work that great. If you can get them to work, great, but like we've never had carousels for us work super great. So to see an account just running carousels is like flabbergasting. But for us, video motion graphics, a big piece of it. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. We still do UGC. And it's kind of a battle of, there's a couple of phrases in a couple of different industries where like we just cannot get away from them. This thing works, we know it works. Man, we'd like to say something else because we're so tired of this, but like if we don't have it, it literally doesn't work. We really vacillate between, you got to put this in there, it's not going to work, and like let's find something that works better. So it's a balance. When we first started doing UGC, one of our employees went down to the parking garage and did a video in their car. We tried to beat that control for like 6 months until it dawned on me like, well, hey, why don't we just send someone else to the garage, like give a couple $100. Like maybe, she's not the only person in the parking lot that will work. That's where we started UGC. People rip off our ads in that vertical all the time. One of my early clients was this kid who's a network marketer. And it was the typical story of like lives in his mom's basement and makes $1 million a year. It was like so ridiculous. And every time we like said how much more money he makes, the ads did better. People would rip off the ads I wrote back then in like Yahoo. And what was always funny to me was I would see an ad that I knew like tested really bad, and I'd see people rip it off, and I'd be like, ha ha ha, like, you don't know that ad sucks yet. Go ahead, copy me. So yeah, it's like a balance between other people are doing it, this shtick works, let's keep doing this shtick, and like we got to reinvent the wheel. I'd say the reinventions usually come by like some accident or something weird. What's the saying? Like good ideas from work never come when you're at work.
So the UGC content, I mean, I guess the question is really what's UGC content? If it's employees doing it, is that UGC content or is that juicing?
Yeah, they're an actor at that point. And I think the use of these other actors are actors, and that's what it is. Blanketing it as UGC, yeah, I would agree, isn't necessarily a user. So there's actors, and then we do have clients that will take their clients, but that style of ad just still kills it. Even the TikTok reps were telling us the other day, like, don't make the ads nice. Really don't make them nice. If you can make them a little shaky, that's even better. A little grainy.
Because they feel more authentic.
They feel more authentic. Back in the day, I had some huge global brands, and we very heavily leveraged Olaplex for a lot of the UGC. And, you're talking about at that point in time, sort of the evolution of really creative and how those ads come across, because authenticity is that grainy texture, right? It's something that's shot spontaneously. The stage is set to come across as authentic. That seems to be kind of the direction that it's going. The downside of that is it's harder to be novelty.
You got to do something sillier. Like one of our clients wanted to do, he saw this TikTok that I'm sure was fake. This woman like drives her Tesla to the gas station. Is like, oh my gosh, how does this work? Can we do something really stupid like that? You just got to keep raising the bar of stupidity. But there's a lot of cool stories about influencers that I think are authentically into something and authentically recommending a brand, and they're like selling out better than any advertising could ever possibly do.
Yeah. Some of those micro influencers that dabble in that UGC type content, it's amazing the product they can move. You think of micro influencer, their reach is limited, but you wouldn't know that by the amount of product that they're able to move through. And it's well done. I've seen those guys begin to master not only social, but now they're mastering these Amazon live feeds. I don't know. It's like a QVC marries Amazon and has a baby kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
That's awesome. Circling back to a topic we were talking about, you mentioned several times during the course of our conversation about lifetime value and how to measure it. This is a topic that Tim and I talk about a lot. We actually grew up in the direct marketing industry, and lifetime value is a is a huge thing. That's how you acquired
Yep.
customers, and that's how you knew what to spend. Google has put in Google Analytics a little lifetime value calculator, right? But it doesn't have enough data to really put a whole picture. So when your clients are looking at lifetime value, what are they looking at? What are the inputs into it, and how do they set it up so that they know they're getting a reasonable approximation of reality?
Yep. So they either literally have all of the data, like literally have it. So this client, there's 1, 2, 3, there's 4 steps in the sales process. The 4th step is the biggest step in the sales process. And they can literally go back over years of data and say, total leads in divided by total step 4, lifetime value is $2,200. And they can do it at specific stages. So actually, it's not 2,200 of an initial lead, it's 2,200 of the 3rd step. And so what they would measure us for is they would say, I know it's a little hard being cryptic in terms of what it is, but they would say, once someone reaches the 3rd step, we'll spend $700 to $1,000 to make $2,850 was like literally the number. They knew it. And so they knew going from step 3 to step 4, did the math, they did it.
But the data is being captured inside a CRM, right?
Inside Fusionsoft for like 10 years. And so crazy ability to slice and dice. But at the end of the day, they would just make that call. To the point of being a more sophisticated advertiser, they just had such a tolerance for like these last 5 campaigns, they didn't do that good, but like, hey, sometimes stuff just doesn't do good. And there wasn't this pressure to like, you got to figure out what happened in Chicago and do a deep dive analysis. Maybe it was just a bad couple of days. So they either have the data stacked, ready to rock, or they're at the point where they're willing to make some approximation of it that I think is grounded in some reality. And I've seen it work and I've seen it not work. The one I've seen work is around my in-laws' business. We've made an approximation around how many people will come back and charter again, but it's incredibly conservative. So it's a $5,000 a day charter. We made an approximation of when people will come back, and they're cool with it. There's not a big loss leader on the front end, but they're using it more for like, hey, I can press a little harder and spend a little more budget. The cost per lead is going to go up, but you're going to get more deals. Initially, it's not going to be quite as profitable, but like, let's think long-term here because they're thinking years out. And then I've seen it not work where we did some work for a company that had a ton of funding. The additional marketing director said lifetime value is, let's say like $100, right? Just acquire stuff for $100. And the spend was like, it was like hot and heavy, you know, like, woo, let's go crazy. I remember looking at the campaign one day, and one of the items in our shopping feed was the Swell water bottles, right when they started to come out, and they're really cool. And it was costing us like $85 to sell a $30 Swell water bottle. I remember thinking to myself, like, this train is going to come to a screeching halt at some point. Could these people potentially be coming back and buying other stuff from the store? Like, it just felt like maybe high level, when you divide one number by 2, you get this $100 number, but like, it just didn't seem like reality. And sure enough, they ended up running out of money. So I think there's some nuance to it, at least with that client, where there's a bunch of different SKUs and a bunch of different products. It was, yeah, we can be aggressive, but we can't spend $85.
You still have to have common sense, right? Everything we've talked about today in digital advertising, we had an earlier conversation on a different topic, but it really still comes down to common sense, right? You got to make sound decisions with the information you have, but got to remember that information comes from tools, and tools are less than perfect. And so you need to bring all that information together, create a story, but still, like, does it pass the test of reasonableness when you just go, does that make sense? Should I spend $100 to get a $30 water bottle sold? Never, ever, 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 ever.
Yeah.
Kind of pivoting a little bit towards, future and paid media right now, paid digital advertising. We've had one shoe drop with Apple. We have Google and their privacy and third-party age out happening here before too terribly long. You've got Facebook in a bit of disarray at some of these privacy changes. So what's your prediction for where this is going as the Wild West sort of comes under martial law?
I think Facebook will figure it out. I'll be a little contrarian. I think there's so much money behind it and there's so much information that I think they'll figure it out. I think Apple will do something. I question that the moves are entirely like, we're just protecting your customers. I don't know that it's entirely altruistic, but I think Facebook will figure it out. Hoping Apple comes up with something interesting that does balance privacy, but also information. I don't think people want to see like crappy ads. I don't want to see ads for Medicare and stuff. So people say they don't want it, but I don't want to see ads for incontinence or catheter replacement.
Some of it's preference, obviously. There's things you don't want to get, but when you think about the advertiser, does not want to be paying to show you an ad. That's the greatest tragedy of it all, is that someone somewhere is paying money to show the ad to the wrong person.
When my kids are on YouTube and I watch them like click through something, I like cringe when they click on the ad because I'm like, oh, this person doesn't know that it's like a 10-year-old kid that fat fingered this. But how many times is that happening? We're having a conversation the other day about this display creative. It's in a discovery campaign. Our hands are kind of tied. And I was telling the team, we interviewed a creative director a long time ago, and he said, like, if I threw an ad down on the table and you walk by it and you glance over at it, do you get what it is? Like, that was my direction to the team still, and that probably will continue to be my direction for a long time. It's a golf client. It's a beautiful picture of a golf course, but like, no one's reading the ad. People are barely looking at this. And so is it someone selling a golf course, selling a vacation? Like, it could be 100 things. And so my challenge to the team was think harder about someone walking by this ad on a table and knowing instantly what it is. Maybe it's as simple as like a text-based image ad that asks a really good question. So I still feel like that's not going anywhere for a while.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time today.
Cool, guys. Thank you so much.
If anybody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way?
Sure. Clients at clicksandclients.com. When I first started, it was just me. And I thought if I put clients, it would seem bigger. So it's on my email.
Yeah, we've all done that. Thanks again for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. I'm Eric Martinez from Blue Tangerine.
And I'm Tim Curtis from Cohere One.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about how Blue Tangerine and Cohere One can help you generate more sales for your business, visit bluetangerine.com and cohere1.com. If you have enjoyed our show today, please tell a friend, leave us a review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the digitalvelocitypodcast.com website to send us your questions and topic suggestions. Be sure to join us again on the Digital Velocity Podcast.